African American couples intervention. And we have a special speaker, a trailblazer in her own right, Dr. Wyatt, a clinical psychologist, board-certified sex therapist, and professor of psychiatry and biobehavioral sciences at the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Behavior at UCLA. Her research examines the consensual and abusive sexual relationships of women and men, the effects of these experiences on their psychological well-being and their cultural context of risk for sexually transmitted diseases and HIV. She has conducted national and international research since 1980, funded by the National Institutes of Mental Health and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, state and private foundations. She's the recipient of numerous awards. Dr. Wyatt has, to her credit, more than 250 journal articles and book chapters, and has co-edited or written 6 books, including Stolen Women, Reclaiming Our Sexuality, Taking Back Our Lives, and No More Clueless Sex, 10 Secrets to a Sex Life that Works for Both of You. Dr. Wyatt is an associate director of the UCLA AIDS Institute and coordinates a corps of behavioral scientists who consult with other researchers to recruit underserved populations and conduct research that effectively incorporates social cultural factors into HIV/AIDS research. She has also testified before the United States Congress 10 times on issues related to health policy. She was the first African American woman to be a licensed psychologist in the state of California. We are honored, and thank you.
Well, thank you. It's such a thrill for me to finally make it here, and I mean that. I got lost this morning. But let me tell you how I started my day. I started at 3 a.m. getting ready for a 4:30 call from KJLH, where my husband and I talked about sex and love for 90 minutes. And it was quite an experience. That's a call-in show if you've ever heard it. So everyone had an opportunity to call in and ask questions about sex or love, or both. And we had an opportunity to really hear what are some of the issues in the community. And let me tell you, it's not about taking medication. So I want to talk to you today about cultural competence and what it means when we actually have sex. Because as far as I know, most of us have sex with somebody. And that's the way that we have approached the intervention that I'm going to be talking about today, is when you and your partner come together to hear the information that you may need to hear so that you don't have to go home and translate what you've heard to somebody else. And the dynamics of that relationship can make it easier for you to be healthy, mentally healthy and physically, or can completely destroy your ideas and your trust in sex. So in that way, I want to be able to focus on some things that I didn't hear talked about this morning in the excellent presentations that were given. So I want to congratulate the speakers this morning and thank you for stepping up, because otherwise you would have been sitting here waiting while I drove around Los Angeles trying to find this place, which I've already been to but just could not do it today. The second thing I did was a conference call of about 20 people, mostly women, but not all, who are planning a conference in Atlanta, Georgia, November 2nd and 3rd. So we have a call every week. We plan this conference because we feel that African American women and their families are completely being overlooked by the current efforts that are being placed on HIV prevention. The money, the focus, the infrastructure does not allow for all groups that are at risk to receive the kind of care that they need. They receive the kind of care that's offered. And many times you lose people and leave people behind. So I want to talk about those people who are being left out of the picture when it comes to AIDS prevention right now. Sankofa is a way of looking back to capture those elements of your relationship, your life, your culture, and your values that are important, but maybe are getting overlooked. And I think that's what we need to do constantly in HIV prevention, is to look back to see, are we missing anything, and are we missing anybody? Because that is also our responsibility, to offer services to everyone who needs them, right? So these are some of the little pearls that I've learned about sex and relationships that I want to share with you. And I want to be able to send flyers about this national conference that we're going to have in November as time rolls on. But I have a little bit of time for that particularly. The sexual experience is best understood in the context of the partner that you're with, the relationship, and the circumstances. Number two, with each partner, past experiences also affect that relationship. So I consider sex to be like a tab in a bar. You might order a drink and you want to have dinner later on, but that tab that you got for that drink is going to follow you through that restaurant, isn't it? They're not going to say, hey, you're going over here, so that's okay. No, it's going to follow you. And that's what our lives do. Our experiences, whether they're positive or negative, follow us throughout the life. If you get services and you're only focusing on what are you doing today, then do you have an opportunity to talk about your past experiences and how they're affecting you? And when you're in a relationship, you bring all that with you, all those people, whether you like them or not, or want to remember them. Everything you do is right there in your head. Understanding what generates sexual pleasure can influence the consistency of behavior. You know, we don't even talk about sexual pleasure, do we? We talk about taking medicine, we talk about having sex. But do you know that for the most part, people don't have sex if it doesn't feel good? And yet some of the less risky behaviors that we are recommending don't feel good to some people. Even condoms don't feel good to everyone. So there's some conversations that we need to have and to be clear on what are we communicating and is it real? You see, because as that very apt gentleman said when he introduced me, and thank you very much, you should be an announcer if you're not already. I'm a sex researcher. So I approach HIV prevention from the standpoint of being realistic about what people do, what they will do, and what they won't do. And I think that some of our goals are lofty but unrealistic. As long as we have poverty and homelessness, as long as we have unemployment and undereducation, we will have AIDS. Because it lives in and clusters into vulnerable people, or vulnerable situations, and vulnerable partners. So we need to look realistically at this. What are we talking about and how are we helping? So how a person feels is another important factor about the behavior they're engaging in. Mental health has been overlooked in HIV prevention. How can we do that? How can we in 2017 overlook mental health? When we know people who are depressed. How many in this room know people who are depressed? So if we are advocates for prevention, how can we overlook it and not talk about it and make sure that the medications, the adherence expectations are all in line with what people can do given the mental health problems that they have? It doesn't make sense for us to continue to overlook it. Consistent sexual behavior with a long-term partner often falls into a pattern of recipe sex. You know what recipe sex is. You can close your eyes and you can say, so-and-so is going to put his or her hand on this part of my body. Then they're going to move to this part, and then we're going to do this or that. That's recipe. It happens so often that you know what's going to happen next. Now, it's very boring, but it's consistent and you can count on it. The problem is, when you tell somebody, don't do this, that part of your recipe anymore, you stop doing that. What's going to happen to the rest of the recipe? You've got to actually take their recipe and help them to adjust it so that they have something to do to replace that thing you just told them not to do. And if you don't tell them something that they like and that feels good that they should do to substitute, guess what will happen? They'll go back to doing the thing that they did before, even though it might be risky. And that's why we have people and epidemics that ebb and flow, because we may get a hold of them for 5 years, and then all of a sudden we see those behaviors reappear, don't we? And you know why? Because we haven't really gotten to the root of why people do what they do and substitute for them something else that they can do. We just simply tell them many times, don't do that. All right. We also know that HIV and STIs are primarily transmitted in relationships. And yet there are few interventions that empirically address HIV and STDs. today we know that we can't overlook one for the other. So almost 15 years ago, I started on a U10, which is a federally funded intervention for couples. This is the only intervention developed in the United States with people of color as the principal investigators. How about that? Now that means something, doesn't it? That means we were developing an intervention for us and by us as people of color. It was a thrill to work with individuals because there aren't that many, and you should be concerned about that. How do other people know about what other groups need if they've never lived and walked in those shoes? You ever ask yourself that? Have you ever looked to see, is the program that you are advocating for relevant and congruent with the culture of the people that you're targeting? Or is it a generic intervention that almost anybody could enjoy and benefit from? But it doesn't have the words, it doesn't have the experiences, and it doesn't have the messengers from the principal investigator down that reflect the experience and the challenges and the victories of that particular ethnic group. I think we are remiss to think that a principal investigator like myself can hide in a university or hide in an agency and send out somebody else. I think principal investigators have to be subject to the community approving of them too. Because if they are not up on their game, and if they don't take the time to be competent and to learn and to listen, then maybe they don't need to be principal investigators telling the rest of people what they ought to do when they don't know anything about it in the first place. And I think we have to look at that and call people responsible if they're going to come into communities and say we're concerned about the epidemic and then begin to tell us what we should be doing instead of asking us if, indeed, all of the things that they think are relevant and appropriate at that time. So what we did was to take these concepts and to develop an intervention that we wanted to be culturally congruent. So I want to talk to you about competence, because you can say you're competent if you work with a particular group. That's not competence. That's working with somebody, okay? Competence is if you understand the history, you understand the culture, the religious and the values, you understand the history of that people. And many people don't know anything about African Americans other than the promiscuity and the reckless abandon with which some people have lived. That's not even a thimbleful of what you should know, because that's not representative of the whole group. They don't know a thing about Latinos. Lump them all in one category. Don't know anything about other Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American groups. They're not competent, but they talk a good game. And sometimes they write a good game. They can get grants, but implementing them is the challenge. And I'm saying to you today, I want you to be happy about the progress that you've made so far with PrEP. But we have a long way to go when it comes to offering a variety of services that are more relevant to the needs of the people who need them. And that's not necessarily one size fits all. This is an intervention for two people, the two people that are having sex, okay? And we wanted it to be culturally congruent, so we went back to the literature and we came back with Iban. From the Akan people in Ghana, West Africa, it means fence, the way of protecting you and your partner, keeping out the things that you want to avoid, keeping in the love, the communication, the unity, the interconnectedness that's so important in a relationship. Now, you would think this is something that any agency would want to adapt because it's relevant to what people actually do. If you're in a relationship, wouldn't you want to include your partner in what you're hearing and what you're doing if you care about them and you want to share what you've learned? Why would you want to come alone if you're having sex with them? Now, maybe if you're having sex with a variety of people, you wouldn't want to bring them all in, not at once. That would be difficult and interesting. But, you know, some providers do ask people to bring in their partners one by one so they get an idea and they can talk to each and every one of them. It's not unrealistic. In fact, you may see multiple partners sometime, and you may not even know the networks that are all connected up together. Okay. So we had about an 8-year grant. There were 4 of us. I bet you know the names of the people Gina Wingood and Ralph DiClemente, Nabila El-Bassel in Columbia. Gina and Ralph were in Emory in Atlanta at that time. And the Jamaat, Loretta and John Jamaat, were in Philadelphia. And me, okay, in Los Angeles. And we had federal money. It was a highly successful intervention, the only culturally congruent intervention for couples that there is, that CDC has endorsed. But it's not used in Los Angeles, okay? Isn't that sad? All right, so I'm talking about a paradigm shift. All right, I'm talking about placing the priority of the relationship and communication in couples, number one, in our agenda. We know that AIDS is an epidemic. We know that we have to reach people, but some people cannot bear you pointing out everything that's wrong in their lives. If they're underemployed, if they are resource limited financially, and then you say, well, now you're spreading a disease. Another way to approach it is that I want to teach you how to stay in a good relationship with somebody that you care about. Bring that person in and let me help to strengthen that relationship. And in the process, I will also teach you, if you'd like to learn, about a variety of things you can do that are exciting to enhance your sex life. Now, who wouldn't want to know that? And that will also protect you so that whatever you have, you keep, and whatever your partner has, they keep. That's the message that we're conveying. It's the same message that we heard about earlier. It's just conveyed in a very different way. The emphasis is not on disease transmission. Because, you know, sex has always been a swapping of biology, hasn't it? It's always been a swapping. That's the way that it works. So we shouldn't be concerned about the fact that we've got bacteria moving from one person to the other. It's a whole issue of how many other persons' bacteria are you moving along with yours that you're now moving to someone else. And people can understand that, but they don't have to hear it in quite the same way. So we tried to convey that these relationships were healthy. We want health in relationships, regardless of the HIV status. Everything bad is not assigned to a person because of their HIV status. These are great people who are living with the virus, and they usually, in our case, have a partner who's not living with the virus. They're just living with the person, all right? So what do you do with a serodiscordant couple? We used a variety of theoretical frameworks. I think this is an extremely important piece, that you have something to guide you and guide your work, not just giving out information to somebody, but you have a guide. And we also used one that was Afrocentric. You know, we act as if it's not important what we give, and we pretty much give everybody the same thing. But when it comes to the statistics, what do we talk about? African Americans are doing this and this. Latinos are doing this and this. And then you don't hear any other mention of how that ethnicity boils down in that work that you're doing. How does that work? You just want to identify a problem in an ethnic group, but you don't want the elements of their culture to be integrated into the information that you provide. That doesn't make for a very comprehensive spread of what we can do. So the Afrocentric paradigm actually is Nguzo Saba. And there's a little booklet that was passed around on black women and HIV, and Nguzo Saba's in there. You know what that is. That's Kwanzaa. People know it by Kwanzaa. But those 7 principles are powerful. And we build HIV prevention around those 7 principles. There's almost every group, every ethnic group that has some principles that you can build HIV around so that it's consistent with what people understand. So what we wanted to know was if our intervention worked. It's an 8-week intervention. And who does it work for? I think that's extremely important. I didn't hear that information as eloquent as the presentations were this morning. I didn't hear anybody talk about who's being left out of PrEP. There are people who aren't taking it, won't take it, won't consider it, and don't want to talk about it. So those are the people I'm concerned about that are getting left behind. Maybe this is another way in which we can also offer another option for people who need the information, but who are not necessarily going to do it immediately. Maybe they'll do it later, or maybe they won't do it at all. We don't know. But does the intervention work? So we looked at the couple. You know, it's not enough to just look at what a person is doing because you don't know what's being introduced to them, who else is influencing them, and what is that person doing if they're having sex. So you just want to address whoever is in front of you. We wanted to address the couple. If we couldn't change the behavior of both people, we consider that a failure in an intervention for couples. Realistic, all right? We wanted consistent condom use. Now, this doesn't say that this intervention couldn't be integrated into a PrEP approach. But I think that people need to know if you're not using it and not using it consistently, there is something else you could use every time, and that's a condom. What about programs that recommend condom use, 100% condom use for those people who won't use PrEP? And even would talk about the possibility of when you would use it and then what you use to substitute it. We also wanted to look at STI incidence. It makes little sense to only look at HIV. We've got to look at both at the same time. And we have some very surprising findings that we found. Well, long story short, the intervention was highly successful all across the United States with over 535 individuals. We were very proud of this intervention, and of course, as I mentioned to you, CDC adapted it. So that's a positive. Okay, so what happened when I came home? All this says about the same thing. The couples used condoms, used them more consistently 100% of the time, and had significantly lower numbers of unprotected sex acts. This is really the way you have to break it down. We also found significant differences between the couples in the intervention and in a health group on STIs. Now, this is interesting, because this is the real world. Concurrent partners. Most of these couples, though they were devoted to each other, had a concurrent partner, or a person outside, or they were creeping. Well, how else do you say it? Cheating. What are the words that you say it when you have more than one partner? What do you call it? Huh? Okay. Being open, all right? You have to monitor that, don't you? So we did look at it, and we found very similar statistics between our control and our group with the Abon Project operating. It wasn't something that we stopped. Those couples kept their outside partners. But you know what they were doing with those outside partners? They were using the condoms that we had told them about with their inside partner. So now we have an inside partner and an outside partner. And there may have been multiple outside partners. The point is, they learned from the couple's intervention that they should use condoms all the time, so they started using with all their partners. That's success. Okay, can't stop people from doing what they do. You can only help to increase their understanding and the importance of prevention. So they increased their knowledge. We talked about STDs. What I talked about this morning at 5 o'clock this morning was knowing your body, get in front of the mirror every day and looking at your body and touching your body so you can feel the lumps and the bumps, the rashes, all kinds of things going on. You need to know where they are, and you need to know when you need to go to the doctor, all right? This is general information. This has nothing to do with HIV. But you see, people have such poor general sex education that if you just start in on disease transmission, you miss the fact that they don't know anything about their bodies at all. They don't even know sometimes that there are 3 openings between a woman's legs. Never seen it, never looked. And yet if you shave off the pubic hair, you realize, whoa, there's a whole area down here I need to know more about, okay? And the pubic hair is not a no-fly zone. It's not something that says, don't look, don't talk, don't discuss. Just go for it, you know. We really have to get more basic with the educational information that we provide even before we get to HIV prevention. We also found that staff were highly motivated to deliver this intervention, but they too had to learn some specific nuances in Northern and Southern California, because this was a statewide effort, all right? But the agencies felt that their ability to deliver a couples intervention created all kinds of challenges for them. What were those challenges? They were seeing 2 people instead of 1. Most agencies are socialized to only see 1 person at a time. They didn't know what to do, for instance, with the negative person, because today, well, who are we targeting? The person who's infected or the person who's not infected? It just depends on what the agency wants to do, but many times the other partner we had nothing for them. And that was a shame. They needed information. They also needed all of the resources like housing, food. They needed jobs, of course. And we had absolutely nothing for a population at risk in Los Angeles and in Oakland. Those are our two hubs. Now, I'm concerned about that. What are we doing then with HIV monies if we have absolutely nothing for people who come in with a partner? They're just there to listen, or can they also benefit from some of the services that are offered to the target person? Shouldn't they be included? But no, we did not see changes on that level. We also reviewed the anatomy. We found that some people did not want to touch a dildo. They found them odd and strange, and we had color dildos, so we thought they were matching the skin color. I think this is rather funny. The color of the individuals in the groups. Remember, we were targeting African Americans. So we had brown dildos, and some people said, that's not normal, that's not real, and I will not touch it. So we had the facilitators, who were men and women, who showed them how to put on a condom. A lot of guys still don't know how to do that. They would love for their partners to do it. They don't want to touch their own penises. Where does that come from? Not wanting to touch your own body. A lot of prohibitions depending on religion and culture. If we don't get down to those things, when people leave us, they still go back to those same behaviors and values, okay? We have a lot of journals. We have a lot of posters, visual arts, and some videos that help couples to understand the importance of prevention, communication, which is number one, learning to talk and listen to their partners. Many people said they did not know how to talk and listen in a relationship. They knew how to yell and throw things, but they'd never seen two people sit down, looking at each other, listening and sharing information, agreeing or disagreeing in a relationship. Well, how can you talk about prevention if you can't even talk in a civil way to your partner? So this was a skill that we also taught in the Abban Project. You can see it goes way beyond what we're talking about in terms of disease prevention. But they talked about stigma. We talked about racial discrimination, which occurs every day in almost every clinic that I know of, where people are discriminated against in terms of who talks to them, how they're talked to, even if they're told they have HIV to this day. Not told by postcards being sent to their home or phone call messages left on their message machines, but actually brought into the clinic to be told about their HIV status. These discriminatory issues need to be heard, need to be recorded and addressed, because we haven't made a lot of progress when it comes to treating everyone in the same way. Not as much as we should. So the problems that we had with implementation, because this was an implementation study and one of few funded. That's why I'm here and you don't see 5 or 10 people talking about implementation. We're one of the few studies that did not have PrEP in it, but could have had PrEP in it. It's just that they were actually concerned about the behavioral dynamics of this highly successful intervention that had a relevance to culture. What we found was state and health departments, and you know this piece, were focused on PrEP, not focused on serodiscordant couples when we were funded. So it was very difficult to get the agencies to come and support us with some of the things that the couples needed. The couples needed transportation, they needed food, they needed housing, and sitting in a group talking about HIV prevention was probably the last thing on their list. What they needed was survival mechanisms to get by first. Then the intervention was of interest to them. The agencies were highly motivated, but the money was tied to one intervention, okay? We found that highly frustrating. I personally did, because Oakland, our other hub, had a much more effective way of the city and the state supporting our intervention in the northern part of California than we did here in Los Angeles. I'm sorry to say that most of the agency's funds were tied to their ability to deliver PrEP, not to serodiscordant couples. So I just wanted, you can't see this, I wanted you to see, if you could, and I think you have the slides, just how resource limited these people are. When we talk about success, these folks had no jobs, very little education, no money, no housing. They had histories of incarceration, and many had a substance problem. They were highly vulnerable people. These are the folks that we really do need to reach. And they were in a relationship. Some of the relationships were created in order to be able to leverage the resources that they have. In other words, if you had food stamps and somebody else had housing, you'd get together because then you could eat and stay someplace. Now that's a different kind of relationship, isn't it? From, oh, I'm loving on you, I'm thinking you're great, let's get together and spend our lives together. It's about what have you got to eat, where are you going to stay, and do you have any money to get across town? So we knew that if the resources are not there for individuals, they are not going to adhere to interventions. They need to be taken care of if they cannot care for themselves. Huge problem. The benefits, however, were that, and you can read them for yourself. What, if anything, do you feel the team should change about the intervention? I don't recommend you change a thing. I love being able to see other couples who are going through the same thing that I am. Couples met other couples when they came in for the intervention. There was a socialization as part of it. You know, maybe MSMs have a lot of socialization going on in clinics because, you know, you're with folks who understand where you go and where you've been. Serodiscordant couples don't have that because there are very few services in our county that are appropriate for them. And we had trans couples call, we had MSN couples call and say, can we be in those groups? People wanted this opportunity. Of course, our funds were limited, so we could only service serodiscordant heterosexual couples. But the need is tremendous. And I think that when you have a grant, and when you are blessed, and I consider it a blessing, I have been funded continuously by NIH for 42 years. I'm the only African-American man or woman who can say that. There are not many people of color who've had this kind of blessing, to have an opportunity to be a voice for my own community. And yet in my own city, I was not successful in being able to interest enough agency so that we could find the couples that were out there, but they needed so much help and so much support, we could not offer everything on a grant. I think when someone has an opportunity to be funded, they need to be supported in this city. We're not doing anything criminal. We're trying to save lives just like everybody in this room is. What's wrong with serodiscordant couples, I ask you? Don't they deserve the same kind of attention or half of it as MSMs do right now? Can anyone answer that question for me? Please do. What's wrong with serodiscordant couples? I won't hold you to that. We found that staff sometimes had to be loaned out to other agencies that didn't have a male and a female facilitator. We trained them, but many staff were kind enough to volunteer so that these groups could be held. I was really impressed with the generosity and the passion that the directors had for this intervention. So the message is, if we don't have the county and the city and the state behind what we do, even if we're funded by the government, you won't see the kind of benefits that occur. We need serodiscordant couples right now. And so if you know of someone who is HIV positive and has an HIV negative partner, give us a call. Danielle Campbell, who helped me to put this slide together, and she's very unassuming. She wouldn't even put her name on the front slide, but she deserves a hand because of her passion and competence. Each and every one of you in this room deserves a hand and a hug for what you do every day. But Danielle has certainly been a wonderful facilitator down at Oasis. If you know of couples, please give us a call Give them a chance and give us a chance. I'm asking you that because we want to be able to report back to NIH that we know now just how important the resources are for these individuals. If they don't get the help that they need, it's not because we didn't want to reach back. It's because we couldn't reach back because there's resistance in the community to focus only on certain things, certain people at certain times. I don't think that we got here, not this far, because I was funded before we even knew anything about AIDS, okay? We didn't get this far by focusing just on some people, some times, and somewhere. No, we didn't. We looked in a broader way. I've never seen any disease. You name me one where they would select out one group to focus on and everybody else could wait. The problem is they can't wait. We know that. We know better, and we should do better. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for considering that you may know some couples. I've been in this game a long time. I'm a grandmother. I'm a grandmother to HIV, and I'm a grandmother to real little girls. And I thank you for taking the time. Forgive me for being late, but you know my heart is here. Always has been and always will. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wyatt.